Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I want to talk about the turning point events in Mushoku Tensei. If you're anime only, you will have seen two turning point events happen so far in the story. The first is the mass teleportation incident, and the second is when Rudeus, Eris and Reincarnation encounter Orsted and Nanahoshi, and Rudeus is almost killed. I'm going to do this video in two sections, with the first being spoiler-free and talking about those two turning points, as well as how the turning points as an idea are used in the story, but from the perspective of the reader or viewer and Rudeus himself. Then I'll let you know when to leave the video to avoid spoilers from the light novel and web novel, because after that I'll be talking about the other turning points in the story, as well as what turning points actually mean in world. Before I get started, please consider subscribing if you like Mushoku Tensei content, because I make a lot of it, as well as other anime content. It really helps me out if you subscribe, and I really appreciate it if you do. And with the intro out of the way, let's talk about the first and second turning points. The first turning point definitely feels like a huge change in the story, though at first we don't necessarily appreciate just how big of a deal it is, as like Rudeus, we don't know that everyone in the whole Fitua region has been teleported randomly across the world, and the region itself has been reduced to a wasteland. This event not only sends Rudeus and Eris to a completely new location and makes any previous goals they've been working towards, like Rudeus earning enough money for himself and Sylphie to attend the Ranoa Magic University, suddenly become irrelevant, as they now need to survive on the most dangerous continent in the world and somehow get home. This is not the only thing the mass teleportation event does to completely reframe the story, however, as this is also when Rudeus has his first encounter with the man god, or Hitogami. Where so far in the story things had been fairly peaceful, and it had all been about Rudeus learning skills, getting to know people, and growing up in a new world. The turning point definitely feels like the event where the bigger plot kicks in, as now Rudeus has a mysterious god giving him advice, a new badass warrior friend in the form of Reincarnation, and a very challenging situation to navigate, and all completely out of nowhere as far as Rudy is concerned, given he'd just been happily celebrating his 10th birthday. This turning point then is definitely what TV tropes would call a wham episode, and it completely shakes up what we expect from the story. But its impact is not limited to this one surprise switch in paradigm, as later, when Rudeus reunites with Paul, we learn more about the consequences of the mass teleportation incident, and we find out that it didn't just send Rudeus and Eris out on an adventure. It actually permanently changed, or in many cases ended, the lives of every single person in an entire region. The turning point, it seems, is not just for Rudeus and his story, but for the whole world. The second turning point is a bit different. By this point we've settled into this new phase of the story, with a 3-year-long arc of Rudeus and Eris trying to return to where it all began, as well as searching for Rudeus's missing family members after they learn about the scale of the mass teleportation from Paul. And it seems like they're nearly at their goal. Reincarnation recognises Eris as a warrior, showing her own development through their journeys, and it seems like soon the travels of Dead End will come to an end. And then a wild dragon god appears. But from a meta perspective, we were already primed to expect the shoe to drop in this episode or chapter, with both being called Turning Point 2. We've seen the scale of change one turning point caused by now, and so already, seeing the words turning point have the effect planned by the author of making us basically think shit's about to get fucky. The first turning point wasn't numbered either, so coming across this one makes you think, oh bloody hell, there's another one. And of course, it also makes you wonder if there will be more of these major wham moments throughout the story, rather than just that initial one to kick off a major plotline and signal the end of the more low-key setup phase of Rudeus's story. The way this event is written also starts us off with a sense of dread, as Rudeus talks about how death can come suddenly and unexpectedly. We see Reincarnation naming Eris a warrior, which should be a happy moment, but now has the distinct air of a death flag about it. And while we may now be worrying that the death in question would be Reincarnation's, it's then revealed that Rudeus is talking about himself. He is sure he's died here, and we as an audience don't know any different. Of course, we know this isn't going to be the end of Rudeus, given we're still very early in the story, but he is a reincarnated isekai protagonist, so is it now going to be revealed that Hitogami can resurrect him, like we see happen to Kazuma in Konosuba on more than one occasion? Does he have some strange ability that allows him to continue his story despite definitely dying, like Subaru in Re:Zero? Well, no. Any guesses that something like that might be in play are quickly revealed to be wrong, as we see that Hitogami doesn't seem to be able to do anything like resurrecting or reincarnating people, making any theories we might have had that it was him or a god like him who brought Rudeus to this world a lot more shaky. And it is actually just Orsted being persuaded to leave Rudeus alive by Nanahoshi that leads to him being healed. Rudeus doesn't have anything working in his favour that will let him cheat death, and like a true god, it was all down to Orsted's whims whether he died forever or survived here. The implications of this turning point definitely feel a lot more focused on Rudeus himself and Eris than on the world as a whole than Turning Point 1, though we do get the sense that there's something much bigger and further reaching from the implied enmity between the dragon god Orsted and the mysterious Hitogami. For now though, the major changes brought about by this event are in terms of the worldviews of Eris and Rudeus. Eris wants to become strong enough to defeat the dragon god, having seen the power of someone who can easily beat Reincarnation, who she has admired as the epitome of a warrior for all this time. Eris has always wanted to be strong, but now she's seen that the peaks of strength in this world are a lot higher than she had imagined, and she also has a burning hatred for Orsted for what he did to Rudeus. Rudy, however, is not so much consumed by hatred, but by fear. He's known for a long time, of course, about people like the Seven World Powers, and that there were people who could easily kill him at his current level, even if he was a genius magic user. But it was kind of like we all know nukes exist in the world, and could easily kill us without having a chance to put up a fight. But we don't really expect that ever to be something that comes up in our day-to-day lives. We don't just expect to run into a guy we've never met before who can launch one, and who's going to want to do that specifically just to kill us. Rudeus's reality has been reframed here. He's not always safe when he's with Reincarnation. Levels of threat much higher than he can currently cope with not only exist, but may have an interest in him. And the reason he was killed was his connection to Hitogami, who has so far given him good advice, and who he was beginning to trust, and even to some extent rely on. Everything has suddenly started to feel a lot more complicated than he'd been considering it to be. And that's really all I can say about the turning points in Mushoku Tensei without spoilers. So if you are anime only and don't want to know anything else, then now is the time to close the video, as I'll be getting deep into spoilers for the whole series in the next section, starting now. Turning Point 3 feels less immediately dramatic than the first two, and is also a longer series of events and decisions rather than a sudden pivotal moment. It begins with Rudeus finding out that Sylphie, who he is now married to, is pregnant, which would be a turning point in life for most people, but isn't really an unexpected curveball in this story. However, then Rudeus receives a letter from Gisu. At this point in time, Rudeus has been studying at the Ranoa Magic University, and as well as that, he has set up home with Sylphie, along with Norn and Aisha being sent to live under his protection, while Paul, Lilia, Roxy, Talhand, Gisu, and some others go to rescue Zenith. Zenith's location was revealed to Roxy by Kishirika, and she's trapped in a labyrinth on the Begarit continent. Gisu's letter is brief, and says only that they're having trouble rescuing Zenith, and they request assistance. Rudeus tells Elena Lise, who is also at the Magic University and has recently gotten married herself, to Cliff, and both of them consider whether or not to go. Rudeus has a lot of reasons not to go. The journey would be long and he doesn't want to miss the birth of his first child. But Nanahoshi, who needs Rudeus around to help with her experiments, agrees to tell him how to get there using secret teleportation circles she found out about from Orsted, so Rudeus can get back faster. If you want to know more about what Nanahoshi is doing at the university, then you can check out my video all about her. But another thing holding Rudeus back from going is that Hitogami has told him not to go. He tells him he should stay and also start a relationship with one of the two beast girls he's made friends with at the university, Linnea the cat girl or Pasena the dog girl. Hitogami says this will lead to a good outcome, but if he goes to rescue Zenith, he will end up having serious regrets. Still, he eventually decides that he will go, and Elena Lise decides to go too. The full story of what happens here is in my video about what happens to Zenith, but ultimately the consequences of this trip are that while Zenith is saved, Paul dies protecting Rudeus, and additionally Rudeus ends up being reunited with Roxy and taking her as his second wife. This is the first time Rudeus has gone against Hitogami's advice, and when Hitogami tells him that if he hadn't gone, Zenith would still have been rescued, but Paul would have survived. We learn later though that Hitogami's main concern here was that he didn't want Rudeus and Roxy to get together. This turning point is probably the first one that makes us really question whether a turning point actually means something in-world, rather than just being a way of describing a big twist in the narrative that starts to send the story in another direction, or just a turning point in Rudeus's life. As it is explained later, the events called turning points are actually the major turning points in the underlying conflict between Orsted and Hitogami, times when things stray dramatically from what Hitogami could have predicted, as well as from what Orsted has seen in past loops. Because Hitogami can see his own future, and has seen that a child of Rudeus and Roxy would become a big threat to him, Rudeus deciding to go to rescue Zenith, which leads to him marrying Roxy, is a major event that he wanted to prevent. Because Rudeus never existed in any other loops Orsted has seen, any children he has are potential new players on the board when it comes to the coming conflict too. However, Rudeus going against Hitogami does result in Paul's death, so this does give Hitogami a chance to win Rudeus's trust once and for all. And that's how we get to Turning Point 4. Turning Point 4 is probably the biggest shock twist in Mushoku Tensei, a series with a lot of surprising events and revelations. Rudeus, who has started keeping a diary, is told by Hitogami to prove his trust for him after the Paul incident by just checking to see if there's anyone in the basement of his house. Rudeus is willing to do this, now believing that the best way to keep the people he cares about safe is to follow Hitogami's advice. But as he approaches the basement, he finds an old man there, and the old man is himself from the future. This version of Rudeus, who is usually referred to in the Mushoku Tensei fan community as Oldeus, so I'll refer to him as that here just to tell them apart, has travelled back in time using complex magic, just to stop Rudeus going into the basement. His magic was incomplete, and he is dying here, but he explains why Rudeus mustn't go in the basement and what Hitogami is trying to achieve, as well as giving Rudeus his version of the diary, which tells him all about what happened in Oldeus's life, and so what the path he'll be going down will look like if he does what Hitogami tells him to. The diary tells a very bleak story, and is basically like if one of the darkest, most terrible timeline ifrits from ReZero was actually canon, and Subaru knew about it. I will make a video all about Oldeus and the diary soon, so look out for that, but I want to just stick to the event as a turning point for this video to stay on topic. So the most important thing is, this basement moment is the point where it all started going wrong for Oldeus. Inside the basement is nothing Rudeus would have actually noticed, but there is a mouse carrying a deadly and incurable disease that will escape when he goes inside, and which will contaminate their food, leading to the death of Roxy. Again, Hitogami wants this to happen because he wants to prevent their child being born, but if Rudeus hadn't had this information, he would have just thought the basement thing was a simple test to prove his trust, and there was nothing of immediate interest or danger inside. Rudeus dies, and Rudeus has a dark Rick and Morty style moment of having to bury himself. He also uses magic to freeze the basement and finds out it was true that there was a mouse inside. When he confronts Hitogami about this, he doesn't deny it, but says that now the only way Rudeus can keep his family safe is to kill Orsted. Rudeus sees this as his only option, despite his fear of Orsted and his now huge mistrust for Hitogami, and so he sets about preparing to ambush Orsted and tries to give himself as many advantages as possible going into that fight. But even with everything he prepared, he can't beat Orsted, and to cut a long story very short, ends up surrendering and becoming Orsted's subordinate, and aiding him in his preparations to ultimately kill Hitogami in the future. This is, again, primarily because Rudeus sees this as the only way to keep his family safe, though over time he does come to like and trust Orsted and to agree with his cause. It's also in this battle where Eris returns to Rudy's side, and she becomes his third wife after that. Now, a lot happens between this and Turning Point 5, which is the final turning point, and refers to the climactic battle of the series. Much of what Rudeus has been doing has been to make sure certain events happen or don't happen based on what Orsted has seen in past loops, as well as trying to identify and defeat people who are under Hitogami's influence, as Rudeus had previously been. In another twist, it's revealed that Gisu has been taking advice from Hitogami all along, and he ends up actually being effectively the end boss of Mushoku Tensei. Gisu has prepared a lot of allies, including some very powerful people like North God Kalman III Alexander Rybak, the Sword God who Eris and Ghislaine had previously trained under, and Badigadi, who has the Fighting God armour, as well as the Oni God. There are way too many people involved in this conflict to really explain it quickly here as a turning point, but essentially it is Rudeus and Orsted, along with all of the people and factions they've won the assistance of over the course of the series, against Hitogami's apostle Gisu, who has been doing a similar thing on the other side of making all these alliances. As a result of the battle, Orsted and Rudeus do win, and Alexander Rybak switches sides to work with them, and several other key players are killed or sealed, including Gisu. Naturally though, this only thwarts Hitogami's plans for now, and so Rudeus and his allies continue on in their preparations to help Orsted eventually defeat Hitogami, which, due to him needing something he can only get after Laplace is resurrected in order to reach Hitogami, is something we always knew wouldn't happen in Rudeus's lifetime. While we have to wait for the sequel to see how that goes down, knowing all of this, we can see that Mushoku Tensei as a series is really the story of Rudeus's life and how his existence caused these major turning points in the ultimate conflict between the Dragon God and Hitogami, a conflict which has its roots thousands of years before Rudeus arrived in this world. So, those are the 5 turning points and what they mean, but what do you guys think about them? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you to my supporters on Patreon who are on screen right now, and thank you too to everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Thank you for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.